let's talk about cognitive bias and how to make how to understand it. So I'm going to start off with a question. How many excellent drivers are on the road? So I would like for you guys to take a guess in the chat, and just give me a percentage of how many drivers you think are great on the road. Right, I see 10, 20, 20, 40, 5, 10, 50. Marissa has a lot of faith in humanity. All right, so we're getting some numbers here. I see the numbers between 1% and 50%. Right? How many people rate themselves as excellent drivers? Not good, but excellent. Right? We have a number between, yes, 95, 80, 90, 95, 60. So the number I found was that 64% of people rate themselves as excellent. However, as we saw in the chat, looking at it, we're looking at numbers between 5 and 20%. Right? Sorry, I got to knock off the least and the most. Just a little statistics there for you. But between that number, we ended up getting between 5 and 20%. Right? Yet 64% of folks rate themselves as excellent. There's a disconnect there, right? Right? And in the middle of that, I think there's no better way to introduce what that disconnect is, right? That disconnect is cognitive bias. Right? And so let's talk about what cognitive bias is. Cognitive bias is a disproportionate weight in favor or against an idea or a thing, usually in a way that's closed-minded, prejudicial, or unfair. Biases can be innate or learned. People may develop biases for or against an individual, a group, or a belief. In science and engineering, that bias is a systemic error. And so, yeah, I want to focus on that last sentence, a systemic error. Right? It messes with our thinking. And as product managers here in the space, I think one of the biggest opportunities or places where we are responsible inside of a team setting is the decision fitness of the organization that we are a part of. Right? How might we make our teams or help our teams make consistently better decisions? And so we can't really get there if our outputs are tainted, right? As much as people want to disconnect outputs and outcomes, right? They're really connected, right? What we put out has an effect on kind of where we're going. And so when we aren't thinking about the biases that may creep into our outputs, it affects the way we think. And next thing you know, you end up as this sheep here going 2 + 2 is 5. It looks right. You did the math, but you're not really correct. And so I'll give an example here. Innovation teams, right, are often looking for moonshots. Moonshots are incredibly hard and require a bit of luck. Everything the team can do to improve confidence in themselves is critical for success, since the market will be rejecting them constantly. If you have, let's say, one of the biases that we're going to talk today around confirmation bias, right? You're never really thinking about the idea that you're probably mostly wrong. Right? And so you end up like that Simpsons meme where Seymour Skinner goes, no, it's the children that are wrong, right? And you can, the children that are wrong yourself, right on out of the marketplace. So let's talk about these red flags that are going to come up. We're going to talk about a few confirmation biases in the next few minutes that are some red flags, some ways for you to understand how cognitive bias is going to or has a hold of your thinking inside of the meeting, right? Which is generally our battlefield as product managers. And I'm hoping that this will be helpful, right? And maybe you can go back to these conversations or these topics or these concepts and use them in order to make your meetings better. And so let's jump right on in. And with our first one, which is confirmation bias. Right? We previously talked about confirmation bias. what is confirmation bias? Right? Confirmation bias is when we think we're really confirming what we know, right? What we believe is automatically right, right? If you go into research, or if you go into a meeting, you automatically hold the concept that you're thinking of as the right perspective, right? And so, how do you know this is going well? Well, one of the heuristics I have in my head is the boat too smooth, right? Are we smooth sailing, right? Are there no arguments? Are people when you come into the room or when you get research, everything sounds correct? Well, it's a big problem, right? If your research is always making sense, if there's no tensions in meetings, and you're in cross-functional meetings where people have different perspectives, you're in trouble there, right? You're probably falling into some confirmation bias. Let's talk about recency bias, right? And recency bias is when you think about the things that are happening to you, most recent, and those are the things that are most powerful in your brain. And so, to me, this is like when things are really easy, right? When you don't have to do any of the rigor around thinking. And so, when things are very simple, like a push button start in a car, you might be in trouble, right? You might be dealing with quick decisions and buzzer logic, which usually speaks to you just taking the last thing you saw and going, well, that's the most important thing. We're off to the races. And so when we take the first thing available, like, we're really in trouble. This also flows into your work, right? So if you're wondering why no one's paying attention to your research, there's probably recency bias at play, because research generally means that you're taking some time and you're spending that time, crafting some analysis that you're going to present to the rest of the team. If they're only going to look at their last Slack message, then we're in trouble here, right? So keep an eye out for that. So availability bias is fairly similar to recency bias. It's when you take a look at what's available around you, and you just simply, that's what you use. And so I've already jumped in with the X on this one, right? I think when you talk about, availability bias, you're talking about, what's top of mind. And when you partner that with recency bias, you run into really big problems. And so you typically see this in organizations where people aren't putting any rigor to meeting discipline, right? So if you never see any agendas throughout your day, or there are folks that aren't facilitating, everybody's looking at that last Slack message. And then what ends up happening is your roadmap becomes what they call the hippos opinion, right? Which means every meeting you go into, generally, people are just kind of waiting for the highest paid person's opinion, and you're not really getting the best outcomes, right? We're talking about your outcomes being tainted. And as you can see, there's a hippo there that I have to fix on the next iteration of this talk. But we're here. Anyway, right? Once the hippo is just kind of roaming, then how are we getting to our best outcomes? We're really not. We're just waiting and waiting and waiting. And we're missing out on the opportunity for our teams to get the best out of the work that we're doing. So let's stop here, right? We just ingested a lot of information about the 3 biases, and I'm pretty sure there are a lot of examples that are running through you guys' mind. I want to take a second and ask, does any of this make sense? Chat, throw something in the chat about a time that one of these biases really hit you. And we'll give you a couple seconds to do so. Very curious about your perspective here.
See what we get from the 93 people we've got on this call.
I know, this is exciting. I should put on some like Jeopardy music or something. All right, we've got some answers coming in. I think our sales and marketing folks get caught up in recency bias. Yes. Although I'll be fair, Kayla, we do as well. I think one of the things I want to avoid is us thinking that, you know, we're somehow abstained from this as product people. I think for us, we find ourselves getting caught in a lot of these biases, even more so than other folks, especially since that we, you know, we're really working in the meeting space. I think it's our opportunity as product people to really help other teams pull out of these things and craft places of contention and tension for us to get to our best ideas. So yes, we do get caught up in recency bias. Other teams do, but I think it's an opportunity for us to look at ourselves and say, hey, we can make this better. Yes, Rebecca, availability bias. Same thing with dev resources. Oh yes, Angela, when we see the metrics we like, haha, that's a really important one. And yeah, evaluation of the market. Yes, that last customer that screamed at you, right? That last QBR you went on, that last conversation you had with a customer, that last presentation you saw. They all can affect you with recency bias. Ryan, I love that. Large customers, right? Your big enterprise customers, the team that's been with you the entire time, they 100% can be the hippo in the room, and that's a great distinction, right? Hippo doesn't necessarily just mean, you know, the boss or the highest paid person, right? It can also be a major customer that is applying pressure, right? And so these are great. And so let's talk about how we can get away from some of these things, some tactics for us to adjust on the fly. Back to what I was saying when I was responding to Kayla, I think it's our opportunity as product managers to be able to adjust these spaces and make them work, not just for us, but the team writ large. And so I think let's start with number one. When it comes to our meetings, one of the things that we tend to do is we tend to take the hour to default. Take the default, which is an hour meeting. And we don't have any agenda. So we kind of have this general idea where we sit down together and we just kind of go for it, right? And this becomes a haven for all of these things that we mentioned. And so a way for us to cut down on the ability for this bias to show up is to shorten up our decision-making cycles. Ask yourself a question. How can I make the decision-making cycle in a meeting as small as possible? Far too often, our teams wait to make decisions, right? We go all the way to the end of the meeting, and then we say, well, our action items are X, Y, and Z. And even if we get to that point, right, there's a lot of times where meetings don't even end like that, where meetings just kind of end, right? And so that becomes a haven for the traps that we're seeing earlier. And so one of the things that you can do as a product manager is, one, write that agenda. I don't care if it's a 5-minute meeting. I don't care if it's a 15-minute meeting. I don't care if they just slapped it on. Even if you take 2 seconds to just write that agenda. And inside of your agenda points, make a bullet point that says, hey, what decision are we making here? And so when you can get to those shorter decision-making cycles, you get to the tension more, and it opens up discussion. Second, right, is meeting discipline. Again, back to agendas. Doesn't matter how much time that you spend before the meeting, but you should spend some time. Right? We all hate meetings. And, you know, if I had a poll here that said, hey, do you hate meetings? I'd probably get 95% yeses, right? But this is the thing. Meetings are our playground, especially as product managers, especially thinking about tools like Productboard, right? This is our playground in order for us to shape the conversation inside of the companies that we're in. And so the meeting, right, is where we can get to that alignment and decision making, right? So if no one's owning meetings, no one's owning meeting management, no one's owning facilitation, well, take that on. Deprioritize something else and take that on. And make sure that the people that walk into your meetings walk out of them with some sort of context to be able to make those decisions that we talked about earlier, especially when they're in shorter cycles. In this case, when you own it, you actually can turn one of the biases that we talked about, availability, into a strength, because you're able to make sure that the resources that people need to see are in front of them via facilitation or agenda. And so that way we're not waiting for the end of the meeting, and we're also making sure that those decision-making cycles are done quite well. And so lastly, this is more of a meta topic about how we present research and then how we use tools like Productboard to display what we're thinking. We have to be very intentional in how we use these tools in order to get our concepts and ideas out to the rest of the organization. So much like your meetings, these things require rigor and can be full of biased thinking. If you take the discipline that we were talking about earlier, and then you take that discipline and you bring that into your research, when you bring these tools into your meeting, they're far more trustworthy, right? And if you have trustworthy tools, people over a longer span of time feel a lot more comfortable in using them over and over and over again. And that's how you avoid just that recency bias, right? Trustworthy outputs from your research and insight, and from your research from wherever it is, that are really targeted, and putting them inside of your shorter decision cycles, especially if those things are from, you know, months or years ago. Again, you're not only getting better results, but you're also training everybody else to understand, like, all of the things that we have are useful to us, right? We should be using these to help us make better decisions. And so, right, we want to have more collective insight into the customer. It's not just enough to talk about it or put it places. It's very important that we're able to craft these shorter decision cycles, have some discipline around our meetings, and having some discipline around the assets and outputs that we put out in order to create a better environment so bias doesn't show up. And so that includes, really shaping that conversation and getting more voices involved. Right? I mentioned facilitation, and I think this is a really key point for PMs here. Facilitating our meetings and getting in front of these biases just makes our ability to influence that much more powerful. And it gives us the opportunity to bring more voices into the conversation to help us make better decisions. I know we all hate hippo wrangling. A part of the hippo thing is trust. Right? And so if you're building trust with that hippo, whether they're a person, place, or thing, they'll feel less of a need to engage. And then they'll stop feeling that pressure to fill air, right? Because a lot of hippos became hippos because they were able to take spaces like meetings and help guide teams. And so if they feel uncomfortable, then, they're going to take over meetings. And so lastly, you're getting more usage, right? People feel more comfortable with these things. People will input more of their critique and ideas into the things that you craft. And then, we can have meetings that are productive especially when you tie them to shorter decision cycles, where you're getting really the best out of these things. So, on my last note, remember, 64% of drivers rate themselves as excellent. It includes us, which is a huge difference from the 5 to 20, right? Bias fills the air there. Do you want to add an extra 40%, 40 to 60% of bad decisions into your product? Probably not. So take an opportunity to look at this cognitive biases, think about these things, take over your meetings, and make better choices today. That's it. Thank you. That is the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam, for sharing your thoughts and your great ideas on that front. That's awesome. I want to jump in with a few questions, so we'll leave some time for the audience to share any Q&As that they have within the Q&A section as well as we get going on this. But maybe one just kind of kick it off is, I shared just during the talk here a list of maybe some of the cognitive biases that people can kind of take a look at. One of the things I like about this particular cognitive bias codex is it breaks down kind of the 4 kind of groupings, things that we need to kind of remember, things we need to act fast on, places where we kind of have too much information, and places where we have not enough meaning. And I'm thinking about that kind of construct in the aspect of how we do product. And sometimes particularly that mindset around needing to act fast and sometimes jumping to decisions without the right information. And I'm curious, how do you maybe defend against that bias showing up in your work, in your product work? And what kind of positions you kind of can take to avoid those, being something that you jump into right away?
Great question, Scott. And yeah, that codex is fantastic. I think I'll start with Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky's work in Thinking Fast and Slow as a place for folks here to really dig deep on this subject, right? Because the two things that we're talking about here is system 1 thinking, which is really our gut, our biases, right? Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? Because for decisions where that fits, making fast decisions and snap decisions is good. This is intuition, right? And sometimes that guides us in a place that our system 2 thinking, which is our more quote unquote rational thought, doesn't. But it can get out of control. And so some of the ways to answer that second part of the question, to think about how do you bring in that system 2 to stop system 1 and its intuition and bias-filled thinking to hop in, is really slow down and think about what decisions should fit in each bucket, right? I think being thoughtful about that on a quarterly, monthly, weekly, even daily basis can be really helpful in helping you get in the way. And then you can start to do things that are tactical, like, hey, this decision, right? I'm going to set 5 to 10 minutes in my calendar to actually sit and think about this. I'm going to use the Feynman technique, right, which is basically writing out a 1-pager on this concept without and just seeing where your gaps in knowledge are. That could be super helpful in figuring out, okay, this is where my intuition is, but I don't see where this next step is. Better step into this as a student rather than an expert, right? It's some ways to kind of humble yourself and get yourself out of that place. And so, yeah, tactically, it's I think strategically is thinking about these things, and then being thoughtful about what things need to be thought about, and then going down to that tactical level of creating time to actually sit and think about these things, finding your gaps in knowledge, and then proceeding accordingly. Scott, you are muted.
Sorry about that. Like I say, I love the idea of the student mindset and what that brings to that. And us recognizing as product managers that we don't have all the answers is sometimes a really healthy thing in building great relationships with other people, showing a little bit of that vulnerability and opening ourselves up a little bit. So thanks for that. I want to jump into some of the questions that are on this side. Landy had asked, any practical tips for shortening decision-making cycles? And she mentioned here particularly if her team is full of 5s and 9s. So maybe you have an answer on that side or thoughts.
So I also want to add one more point to the last point for PMs here. One of the most trust building phrases in a meeting is "I don't know." I know that's extremely counterintuitive, but if you're able to say that, especially if you come with information and you can show that you've done your thinking on this, yeah, it's good for you. So in terms of Landy's question, that's funny. I don't remember Enneagram types, but I think just generally practical tips. I think it's very similar to my last answer when looking at your meeting agenda and saying, what decisions do I want made here? And then writing that out and being transparent about what decisions you need. And then matching your meeting, right? Is that cycle 5 minutes? Is it 20 minutes? Is it 30 minutes? Right? How deep of a conversation do you need to have based on really the amount of ambiguity and kind of goals and kind of your mission, vision, strategy, all that fun stuff. Thinking about that. And then, yeah, thanks God for the Enneagram. See, I don't know.
Either
there
do
you
I.
go.
I learned nothing new.
See, trying to practice what I preach. Looking at these really quickly, 5 and 9, the investigator, right? Yeah. I think it's having a pre-conversation and building trust with that person, right? Especially if this is somebody that you're working with all the time, right? There's probably a reason why they feel secretive and isolated, right? And it probably goes back to trust. So there's an opportunity there to chat and like get in their inner circle, because that perceptive and innovative pieces of them, right, are extremely useful to solve problems. And in terms of the peacemaker, this is an opportunity to, talk to them about critique and the power of critique. They're probably hiding, right, because they know that, it's safe. They've been in environments where that's been super useful to them, right? And it's really holding them back. So think about leaning on their receptiveness to either A, keep a conversation going, and B, like you can even push them, right? And say, hey, what do you think? We all think that you're great. What do you think, right? And sometimes you can even get, as a facilitator, you can say, hey, we want answers within 10 seconds, right? It's only 10 seconds. Just kind of give me your first thought, right? And getting them out of that, into that process. Oh my God, I don't want to encroach on Matt's time, because I want to sit and listen to Matt. As sometimes I get an opportunity to when we have a conversation.
That's cool. That's cool. I want to say a huge thanks again, Adam. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts and ideas on this. I know I loved your article that you'd written on cognitive biases, and it's great to see it extended into this talk and conversation and this community. So again, really, really appreciate the time today. I'm going to take you off being a co-host. And we'll get Matt set up for the next conversation. Hopefully you can stick around and catch his talk. And we look forward to seeing a little bit more around too in the community.
Of course. I don't ever miss Matt, so I'm going to shut up and listen.
Awesome. All right. You take care. And as a reminder too, if you found today helpful, we also have another great event coming up in October on how to run product at scale, which is our Product Excellence Summit here at Productboard, and encourage you to check that out as well. There's information as well on the Product Makers community for that.